What is up, hooligans? This is Jay Hooligan here.
Hey guys, Hooligan V.
Yes, and I know we took a week off on this break for President's Day, but we are back right into it. First thing we want to mention, though, we did drop our Patreon. Our Patreon did drop some new footage, some exclusive content out there. We had a full reading of our script, The Curse. We will be updating with more exclusive content, one of which is a behind-the-scenes look at Fist of the Vagabond for the stunt training that we had participated with our actors and our stunt crew. So, but the only way you can see that is to sign up with patreon.com/HideHooliganFilms and become a member through there. So we will be adding much more content to that. If you want to see that, sign up. Alright, so what we have for today, since there's been a lot of things going on this past week, we typically try to stay away from political stuff. However, we do like to talk about film and other stuff too. But for film, this article had just come out, and we are going to read it because we posted an article on Film Jammer. It is an essay by Martin Scorsese in Harper's magazine that just came out for the March issue. So technically, next month, right? We're still in February,
so it's
right?
From the March 2021 issue.
Yes, we are in. Yeah, we're still in February.
Question, yes, we are.
Huh. Okay, but this is the first time we're actually going to be reading this. We posted one, I believe it was from IndieWire, and it mentioned the article. We wanted to go through this firsthand with you guys and just got to give you our thoughts, because he is talking about content, the lost art of cinema. He's been speaking out a lot about this with comparisons to superhero films, and what did he call it? Was it him that called it? It was like a roller coaster or theme park films. Yeah, so we wanted to see how he mentioned this, because he was mentioning how content has been downplaying or devaluing cinema, and he particularly targets streaming platforms. And I know we've talked about streaming platforms and how they've been trying to vertically integrate. So we wanted to go through this article. Again, this is the first time that we're reading this, so we've not read this at all. It is about Federico Fellini, who is an Italian filmmaker. For, I believe his style was neorealism. But he was made famous for a lot of his own films. He's a very influential filmmaker. Be sure to look him up if you can. There's a lot of good film history there.
Where can they find the article?
Oh, this one? This is on Harper's magazine, harpers.org. It does say archive, which is funny because it's brand new. But it is on harpers.org for there, or Harper's magazine. So maybe we'll leave a link. We'll leave a link in the description for you guys. Alright, so El Maestro, Federico Fellini and the Lost Magic of Cinema. Exterior 8th Street, late afternoon, circa 1959. Camera in non-stop motion is on the shoulder of a young man, late teens, intently walking west on a busy Greenwich Village thoroughfare. Under one arm, he's carrying books. In his other hand, a copy of The Village Voice. He walks quietly past men in coats and hats, women with scarves over their heads pushing collapsible shopping carts, couples holding hands, and poets and hustlers, and musicians and winos, past drugstores, liquor stores, delis, apartment buildings, the usual. By the way, he is an older filmmaker, so yeah. These are all typical for that. Alright, but the young man is zeroed in on one thing: the Marquis of the Art Theater, which is playing John Cassavetes' Shadows and Claude Chabrol's Les Cousins. He makes a mental note and then crosses Fifth Avenue and keeps walking west, past bookstores and record shops, and recording studios and shoe stores, until he gets to the 8th Street Playhouse. The cranes are flying, and Hiroshima Mon Amour and Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless is coming soon. We stay on him as he turns left on 6th Avenue and hustles his way past diners and more liquor stores and newsstands and a cigarette store, and crosses the street to get a good look at the Waverly Marquee, Ashes and Diamonds. He cuts back east on West 4th past Kettle of Fish and Judson Memorial Church on Washington Square South, where a man in a threadbare suit is handing out leaflets. Anita Ekberg in furs, and La Dolce Vita is opening at a legitimate theater on Broadway, with reserved seats for sale at Broadway ticket prices. He walks down LaGuardia Place to Bleecker, past the village gate, and the bitter end to the Bleecker Street Cinema, which is showing Through a Glass Darkly, Shoot the Piano Player, and Love at 20, and La Notte is held over a third straight month. He gets in a line for the Truffaut movie and opens his copy of The Voice to the film section, and a cornucopia of riches jumps from the pages and swirls around him. Winter Light, Pickpocket, The Third Lover, The Hand in the Trap, Andy Warhol screenings, Pigs in Battleships, Kenneth Anger and Stan Brakhage at Anthology Film Archives, Les Dolos, and in the midst of it all, looming larger than the rest, Joseph E. Levine presents Federico Fellini's 8.5. As he pores over the pages, the camera rises above him, and the waiting crowd as if on the waves of their excitement. And then it's got a picture of La Dolce Vita here, all stills courtesy of Criterion Collection. And then starts his essay. Alright. Flash forward to the present day as the art of cinema is being systematically devalued, sidelined, demeaned, and reduced to its lowest common denominator, content. Alright. As recently as 15 years ago, the term content was heard only when people were discussing the cinema on a serious level, and it was contrasted with and measured against form. Then, gradually, it was used more and more by the people who took over media companies, most of whom knew nothing about the history of the art form or even cared enough to think that they should. Content became a business term for all moving images. A David Lean movie, a cat video, a Super Bowl commercial, a superhero sequel, a series episode. It was linked, of course, not to the theatrical experience, but to home viewing on the streaming platform that have come to overtake the movie-going experience, just as Amazon took over physical stores. On the other hand, this has been good for filmmakers, myself included. On the other hand, again, it has created a situation in which everything is presented to the viewer on a level playing field, which sounds democratic but isn't. If further viewing is suggested by algorithms based on what you've already seen, and the suggestions are based only on subject matter or genre, then what does that do to the art of cinema? So, I would stop there because I need a breath.
Yeah.
Thoughts? Because that was pretty deep that he went into there, but pretty straightforward.
I never thought about that, though, like with content being more of a business term for film.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes sense, because I remember as a kid it was always like movies and TV shows, and then like, oh, let's go watch this YouTube video. We were very separate for me when I was growing up. So hearing that and just realizing how much it all just became one sort of meshed video platform.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really do much for like the creators themselves.
And I get that, and we've talked about this as well, where we're talking about there's less filmmakers that want to master their art, and I kind of feel like that's the basis of where he's kind of going with this, because it is more content. Everyone knows that saying, content is king, but when you're talking about filmmaking, it's very specific to, like, there's an art form to it, whether you're a cinematographer, whether you're a screenwriter, or a director, or even an actor, and how you portray yourself, or how you portray different characters, how you step into those. There's so many different things and so many people involved in the filmmaking process. Like, where did we learn to just do it without a level of quality, right? And we have seen businesses or business gurus talk about that, like, just go out there, put out as much as you can, you're gonna get better at it. And I believe we've made comparisons to that with like the pots analogy.
Right. Well, I think though too that the demand has been more,
Yeah.
So that's why people have just been putting out video after video after video versus quality.
Yeah. I get that, and I agree. I agree with that. But at the same time, it's like, are they getting better with it? Are they stepping it up? And I know that pots analogy was supposed to be two classes that make pots, one for like a week. And one was tasked with making one pot each person making one pot. That's the best they can make. versus the other class, which was tasked to make as many pots as they can over the week. And by the time they finished, it was a class that made more pots that had the better quality one by the end versus the one who only worked on a single pot one time. Right? So the repetition is one thing, and I think a lot of people kind of confuse that, or they might confuse it with content, because the content, if I just put it all out there, it's, you will get better with it, with understanding, but having that mindful just mindset, being mindful about things on how can I get better, what does it mean to have your frame heights, what does it mean to have an elliptical edit or something like that, how do I edit better, how do I add title cards, what are title cards, different ways to edit and just different ways to film, just to kind of bring it back to that whole art of filmmaking. And a lot of people complain about us with our degrees, because we have bachelors of science in filmmaking. Filmmaking is vastly an artistic realm, right? So yes and no, I get it. There is digital filmmaking. That's it. We have degrees in digital filmmaking and video production, so it is a little bit different, but we did study a lot of the old techniques. We had to study like Pudovkin and Eisenstein and Fellini and Godard. We had to go through all that, and what and I've mentioned this before, what I loved about our school wasn't just about theory. We actually practiced it. We tested all those theories. Hey, what happens when you don't cross that line, but you cut and you get a jump cut? Even how close can I get it? And it still acts like a jump. And I've seen it. We've done it because we've been there, right? But I kind of feel like that's where Scorsese is trying to get at with, instead of just purely putting content out over and over again, he's actually talking about there was much more to it. And I do like that he did point out, like, yes, streaming and content, these streaming platforms have actually helped him out in his career. So he's not blind to that. He is very aware of like where it's at, and that it is a huge part of our culture. So, a lot of it. You got anything else on that? Cat video.
I don't know. I just thought it was weird that they, like I said, they melded it all together. Content was just another term for anything that was being put out there. Yeah. And I get the business part of it. I just I enjoy the art part of it as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we were just discussing a particular way to film action, right, earlier tonight.
Right.
And then how to use the art form, not just having the content inside of it being, something that's worth watching or entertaining, but actually using the art of filmmaking and shots, and designing shots around it to tell the story. One of the practices that we used to do is watch films on mute just to see if we can pick up what the story is. And then we used to watch it again afterwards with sound, so that we could tell, oh, was that what we thought what was going on? That was one of the practices we did in film school. And then sometimes we still do that.
Right.
It's been a while, actually, since we've done it. But yeah.
Well, I think it's just finding, the balance between both business and art.
Yep.
So.
I agree. I absolutely agree. All right, let's continue on. All right, curating isn't undemocratic or elitist, a term that is now used so often that it's become meaningless. It's an act of generosity. You're sharing what you love and what has inspired you. The best streaming platforms, such as the Criterion Channel and Mubi, and traditional outlets such as TCM, are based on curating. They're actually curated. Algorithms, by definition, are based on calculations that treat the viewer as a consumer and nothing else, which is true. All right, the choices made by distributors such as Amos Vogel and Grove Press back in the 60s were not just acts of generosity, but quite often of bravery. Dan Talbot, who was an exhibitor and a programmer, started New Yorker Films in order to distribute a film he loved. Bertolucci's Before the Revolution, not exactly a safe bet. The pictures that came to these shores thanks to the efforts of these and other distributors and curators and exhibitors made for an extraordinary moment. The circumstances of the moment are gone forever. From the primacy of the theatrical experience to the shared excitement over the possibilities of cinema. That's why I go back to those years so often. I feel lucky to have been young and alive and open to all of it as it was happening. The cinema has always been much more than content, and it always will be. And the years when those films were coming out from all over the world, talking to each other and redefining the art form on a weekly basis are the proof. Okay, solid point that he's got here. Like I said, there's a lot of things that people may not agree with Scorsese. You know, there's things that I don't agree with Scorsese, but I do feel like he does have a solid point with this. This kind of goes back to the whole idea of you're seeing more filmmakers understanding, oh, wait, there's a reason why we have theatrical releases. There's a reason why we have premieres and red carpet PRs for this, is because it raises the level of cinema. It raises the bar for, you know, people that are new filmmakers to put out a better film. Forget what I was reading. Oh, it was just this week too. Something like it might have been a book. You're only as good as your next film, is what it was. I think that's what it was called. It might be on my list. Mm-hmm. But it's essentially talking about like that. You're always going to try to keep moving forward and getting better and better with it. Every time you put out a film, you should be going to push the limit to be better at it. Whether it be through the actual filmmaking, through the shot design, through the acting, pulling from your actors, or whatever, you know, or the story, just the overall story as one, you know, all those things matter, and then trying to better yourselves with that all matter, right? So I feel like I said, Scorsese does have a solid point here, and I do feel that because we've seen filmmakers that do that. It's like when you let your ego get in the way, it really inhibits your growth, right? Celebrate your wins, fantastic, but don't celebrate for too long. Always look for that next step, because that's what's going to help you grow and become even better.
What is it? You can always do better.
You can always
want to strive for better.
Absolutely.
Even after.
Yeah, even after. You know,
enjoy it.
Yeah, you can still enjoy it. But you should always be pushing to push your limit. And we've seen filmmakers get stuck in that rut for many years. You know, and again, that for whatever reason. That could be personal reasons. That could be professional reasons. Who knows? You know, there are many, many different reasons why. But if you're not trying to push that limit, you know, you're not actually trying to push the art form for it. And that's, to me, is a problem in what, like, kind of like what Scorsese is pointing out here. Right? So What else did he mention in this? So yeah, that kind of talked a little bit. I believe he was talking a little bit about the theatrical experience with here as compared to streaming, right? So exhibiting it out there, and like I mentioned before, you know, why trying to bypass that, and all these studios want to vertically integrate where they own all the content and the distributors, and they're literally doing their own form of modern day block booking with licensing only what they want to theaters or to other streaming platforms. That's literally vertical integration. That is a monopoly. Vertical integration is a monopoly. Period. That's what it is. There's the Sherman antitrust law, which is put into place to prevent big corporations or big studios from doing this. Now, they're using streaming, the new media loophole, to get to that. And like I said, I'm actually happy that Scorsese is speaking out against this. We've seen other articles from late last year with CAA putting out, like, saying, hey, you know, your pay structure isn't compensating our actors or the people in our that we represent properly, because you're now circumventing theaters. And now you guys just want to go straight to stream, and they can't keep up with how much money they're dropping. Right? So they're literally vertically integrating, and then there's a huge squeeze on indie filmmakers and other filmmakers out there as well. And you know who's making bank? These streamers. But they're paying flat fees, right? And that's where it starts to be like, okay, now you're starting to devalue that, right? Learning about distribution from an indie perspective, I mean, should be something that should always be a part of filmmaker. If you want to do this seriously, if you want to do filmmaking seriously, we take that seriously, which is why we took years trying to understand and learn about distribution, right? And then we try to give that to other people, like, hey, let's talk about distribution. What is your plan for the film? If your plan for your film is like, hey, throw it on YouTube, great. But if you spent real money into it and you did fundraising for it, if you have investors in it, you have no plan. That means you have zero plan to actually pay them back.
It's okay to be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then usually that's where we usually help filmmakers and like figuring out what do they want to do, where do they want to see their film, and then like make a plan for that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on touching base on that, I love when people say, I don't know. How many times do you hear me say that? It's okay. I do. I say that all the time. Yeah. I say it all the time. Because if I don't know, I don't know. But if I don't know, it's a great place to be because that means I go find out. If you don't know, fantastic. That means you're hungry to understand and know it. So you can find out. And you'll find out much more than you probably ever anticipated you would find out about it. Because you're hungry for it. Okay? But yeah, that's a little bit of a digression. But sorta. So not sorta. Like yes and no. Alright, let's go ahead and continue. Alright. In essence, too far. In essence, these artists were constantly grappling with the question, what is cinema? And then throwing it back for the next film to answer. No one was operating in a vacuum, and everybody seemed to be responding to and feeding off everybody else. Godard and Bertolucci and Antonioni, and Bergman and Imamura and Ray and Cassavetes and Kubrick and Varda and Warhol were reinventing cinema with each new camera movement and each new cut. And more established filmmakers such as Wells and Bresson and Huston and Visconti were re-energized by the surge in creativity around them. At the center of it all, there was one director whom everyone knew, one artist whose name was synonymous with cinema and what it could do. It was a name that instantly evoked a certain style, a certain attitude toward the world. In fact, it became an adjective. Let's say you wanted to describe the surreal atmosphere at a dinner party, or a wedding, or a funeral, or a political convention, or, for that matter, the madness of the entire planet. All you had to do was say the word Fellini-esque, and people knew exactly what you meant. In the 60s, Federico Fellini became more than a filmmaker. Like Chaplin and Picasso and the Beatles, he was much bigger than his own art. At a certain point, it was no longer a matter of this or that film, but all the films combined as one grand gesture written across the galaxy, like an auteur, pretty much. Going to see a Fellini film was like going to hear, is it Calles sing, or Olivier, huh? Calles? Yeah, Calles. My bad. Sing, or Olivier act, or Nureyev dance. His films even started to incorporate his name, Fellini Satiricon, Fellini's Casanova. There's even a Fellini's Roma, which was, ironically, another semi-autobiographical film based in the 30s and 70s, I believe it was. But it is not the same Roma that won all the awards back in, was it 2018? Yeah, different type of Roma.
That long ago?
Yeah. But it was still kind of similar. Mm-hmm.
The one to start it all was the streaming stuff where they were like, "Oh, what do you mean Roma got an award? Was it Spielberg?"
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Hold on there. Alright, so the only comparable example in film was Hitchcock. But that was something else, a brand, a genre in and of itself. Fellini was the cinema's virtuoso. So it's almost sounding like he's saying it was the birth of the auteur. Even though Hitchcock might have had his own genre per se, but it's still kind of the same thing. And a lot of times we talk about auteurs, at least when I remember in film school when we used to talk about it, it's kind of like this abstract idea. It's not just like, hey, this shot makes you an auteur. Even though there's a lot of people that may think that, like, oh, I did a wonder shot, so that makes me an auteur. It's actually a lot more than that. And generally, there is a particular style, like you say, Fellini-esque, where you say this is the style that they do. And it generally happens doesn't happen over a single film, but over many films that an auteur makes. All right, so if I mention, say, Tarantino, because I wrote a report on him, you know Tarantino is an auteur. You can recognize a film just by watching it.
Feet.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of his main themes. But you can recognize a Tarantino film when you watch it. You don't have to say it like this is a Tarantino film. You just know, right? That's what makes him an auteur. And now the other side of that is the mature style of filmmaking, which is generally like how everyone else films. Like, you cannot discern between the two. And what's interesting is I've seen Tarantino sort of do that with a little bit more with Django Unchained. He tried to move towards a little bit more of a mature style to show that he can do what everybody else does anyway, plus incorporate some of his other themes that he usually does anyway. You know? So that's why a lot of his earlier films were in his own style, what he wanted to do. You know, whether he's using a tilt shift, or it's actually not a real tilt shift focus, but just the way that he edited it, and the themes and the types of stories he did versus like what he was doing now. You know, they're vastly different, but they're still all elements, and you could tell it's his style. All right, so that's what an auteur is, and it does sound like he's talking about like Fellini might have been the birth of the auteur in this sort of sense. Even though, like I said, you can for the most part tell what a Hitchcock film looks like, you know. But it was more of a genre that he did in this for his style versus like his overall style of films and thematic material that he had in there. Got anything? No, I will
No,
not. All right.
not.
Oh, all right. Let's continue on this thing. All right. By now, he has been gone for almost 30 years. The moment in time when his influence seemed to permeate all of culture is long past. That's why Criterion's box set, Essential Fellini, released last year to mark the centennial of his birth, is so welcome. Fellini's absolute visual mastery began in 1963 with 8½, in which the camera hovers and floats and soars between inner and outer realities, tuned to the shifting moods and secret thoughts of Fellini's alter ego, Guido, played by Marcello Mastroianni. I'm doing terrible with this, sorry. Mastroianni. I watched passages in that picture which I've gone back to more times than I can count, and still find myself wondering, how did he do it? How is it that each movement and gesture and gust of wind seems to fall perfectly into place? How is it that it all feels uncanny and inevitable, as in a dream? How could every moment be so rich with inexplicable longing? Sound played a big part in this mood, which I am a huge fan of sound design and music. Fellini was as creative with sound as he was with images. Italian cinema has a long tradition of non-sync sound that began under Mussolini, who decreed that all films imported from other countries must be dubbed. In many Italian pictures, even some of the great ones, the sense of disembodied sound can be disorienting. Fellini knew how to use that disorientation as an expressive tool. The sounds and the images in his pictures play off and enhance one another in such a way that the entire cinematic experience moves like music. Or like a great unfurling scroll. Nowadays, people are dazzled by the latest technological tools and what they can do, but lighter digital cameras and post-production techniques such as digital stitching and morphing don't make the movie for you. It's about the choices you make in the creation of the whole picture. For the greatest artists such as Fellini, no element is too small. Everything counts. I'm sure that he would have been thrilled by lightweight digital cameras, that they wouldn't have changed the rigor and the precision of his aesthetic choices.
It goes back to, like, just the art of it, right?
Yep.
Watching it without sound, like, does that feeling still get conveyed through the images, or just listening to the sound, so that feeling still get conveyed through sound? You know, like they said, you can have all these nice little effects and whatnot, but it doesn't tell the story.
Yeah. Our old sound teacher, he had passed a few years back, Brad Fuller. He used to make us not just watch films on mute, but we would actually map out sound design And we'd say like, hey, what would we put in here based on the visuals? How would we enhance or contrast or complement what's visually being seen to create a film? And I believe it was that Eisenstein. I always get them mixed up. Eisenstein and Podofkin. One of them was like, I think it was Podofkin, where it's like elements when you cut side by side the juxtaposition. It's like it adds to a thematic material. I'm pretty sure Podofkin. It might be. I forget that. That's when I got to look up. Sorry, but it's essentially the same thing where sound plays a pivotal part in that. And I get it where you're trying to do, if you're trying to do say like action and you need, you may not have a Foley artist to do every punch or fall or rustle or stuff like that. You have to use a sound library. However, even when I had to pull from sound libraries, I was literally in there adjusting not just the volume of it, but the tone, the length, how it sounded. I think at one point I've changed somebody's inflection in a word, even in their dialogue, just to make it sound like how I wanted it to sound. And there's so many different aspects to it, but couple that with say cutting on music, right? In the editing process, how do you get that beats, right? And there are different ways you can do that, and then you can find songs that do it, or you score songs or score music, have somebody score it for you, and then they stick to the beat that you already had, where it's like maybe it starts out slow, and then each cut starts getting shorter and shorter on a rhythmic basis, right? But that's part of the art of filmmaking, right?
I think though what it is that you want to be able to have your audience be able to come across that feeling, that you want your audience to feel what you want from that scene, from that whole movie, through like the images and through the sound. Yeah.
And then there are films out there like how Scorsese we talked about earlier, how they're like theme park, roller coaster style films, and we call those popcorn flicks. Things that we just want to go in there just to go watch, Expendables, Avengers, things like that may or may not have really in-depth stories that delve into the human psyche or the human condition, right? They're just there to just entertain us, give us something, and we fall into that. We've written stories like that. I think It Curses a slasher film. We're not doing that for the cinema. We're doing that just for the fun of it, for the entertainment side to it, like a theme park. I've worked at theme parks. So I get it, Not only work in film, not only work in a traveling show, I've worked in theme parks too. So it's, been all over the place. But it's essentially the same thing, right? But you are correct. Like I do agree with that. It's just kind of all goes back together. All right, let's go on. It's important to remember that Fellini began in neorealism, which is interesting because in many ways he came to represent its polar opposite. True. He was actually one of the people who invented neorealism. In collaboration with his mentor, Roberto Rossellini, that moment still astonishes me. It was the inspiration for so much in cinema, and I doubt that all the creativity and exploration of the 50s and 60s would have occurred without neorealism to build on. It was not much of a movement as a group of film artists responding to an unimaginable moment in the life of their nation. After 20 years of fascism, after so much cruelty and terror and destruction, how did one carry on, as individuals and as a country? The films of Rossellini and De Sica and Visconti and Zavattini and Fellini and others and many, many others. I am kind of seeing a theme here on how he writes.
No films, commas?
Yeah. Well, not just that. Just and this, and this, and this, and this, and... Okay. Films in which aesthetics and morality and spirituality were so closely intertwined that they couldn't be separated, played a vital role in the redemption of Italy in the eyes of the world. So, art imitates life. Life imitates art imitates life. That's what that is. Fellini co-wrote Rome, Open City, which is different than his one, Roma, I believe, and Paisa. He also reportedly stepped in to direct few scenes in the Florentine episode when Rossellini was ill, and he co-wrote and acted in Rossellini's The Miracle. His path as an artist obviously diverged from Rossellini's early on, but they maintained a great mutual love and respect. And Fellini once said something quite astute. that what people describe as neorealism truly existed only in the films of Rossellini and nowhere else. Bicycle Thieves. I remember that one. We watched that one. Umberto D. Yeah. And La Terra Trema aside, I think Fellini meant that Rossellini was the only one with such a deep and abiding trust in simplicity and humanity. The only one who worked to allow life itself to come as close as possible to telling its own story. Fellini, by contrast, was a stylist and a fabulist, a magician and a teller of tales, but the grounding in lived experience and in ethics he received from Rossellini was crucial to the spirit of his pictures. That's really interesting. I kind of like that. Right? It's like life has many different avenues or something. I came of age as Fellini was developing and blossoming as an artist, and so many of his pictures became precious to me. I saw La Strada, the story of a poor young woman sold to a traveling strongman, when I was about 13, and it hit me in a particular way. Here was a film that was set in post-war Italy, but unfolded like a medieval ballad or something even further back. An emanation from the ancient world. This could also be said of La Dolce Vita, I think, but that was a panorama, a pageant of modern life and spiritual disconnection. La Strada, released in 1954 and in the United States 2 years later, was a smaller canvas, a fable grounded in the elemental, earth, sky, innocence, cruelty, affection, and destruction. So they're talking about thematic materials, right? Thematic elements in there. Whew. I think we watched La Strada too in class. There's so many films. I lost track of how many films we watched. It's been ridiculous.
Studied.
Not
watched.
No,
studied.
Yeah.
There were some films where I just.
No, I get it.
I had to get through it and really look for the deeper meaning.
Weekend. I love Godard, but sitting in traffic. You made your point. I get it.
This is me trying to get out of class.
All right. So essentially, yeah. I mean, like I like how he's talking about the contrasting ideas, how the artistic development of it all. You know, there's a lot of great stuff in this. All right, continue on. For me, it had an added dimension. I watched it for the first time with my family on television, and the story rang true to my grandparents as a reflection of the hardships they'd left behind in the old country. La Strada was not well received in Italy. To some, it was a betrayal of neorealism. Many Italian pictures at the time were judged by this standard. And I suppose that setting such a harsh story within the framework of a fable was just too odd for many Italian viewers. Around the rest of the world, it was a massive success. The film that really made Fellini. It was the picture for which Fellini seemed to have labored the longest and suffered the most. His shooting script was so detailed that it ran to 600 pages, and near the end of the extremely difficult production, he had a psychological breakdown and had to go through the first, I believe, of many psychoanalyses before he was able to finish shooting. It was also the film that, for the rest of his life, he held closest to his heart. And that is... which one are they talking about?
La Strada.
La Strada, right? Yeah. Knights of Cabiria. A series of fantastic episodes in the life of Roman streetwalker. The inspiration for the Broadway musical and Bob Fosse film Sweet Charity solidified his reputation. Like everyone else, I found it emotionally overpowering. But the next great revelation was La Dolce Vita. It was an unforgettable experience to see that film alongside a packed audience when it was brand new. La Dolce Vita was distributed here in 1961 by Astor Pictures and presented as a special event at a legitimate Broadway theater, with reserved mail-order seating and high-priced tickets, the kind of presentation we associated with biblical epics such as Ben-Hur. We took our seats. The lights went down. We watched a majestic, terrifying cinematic fresco unfold on the screen, and we all experienced the shock of recognition. Here was an artist who had managed to express the anxiety of the nuclear age, the sense that nothing really mattered anymore, because everything and everyone could be annihilated at any moment. We felt this shock, but we also felt the exhilaration of Fellini's love for the art of cinema, and consequently for life itself. Something similar was coming in rock and roll. In Dylan's first Electric albums, and then in the White Album and Let It Bleed. They were about anxiety and despair, but they were thrilling and transcendent experiences. So yeah, having film just affect that. That's just the feeling of art, you know. Something that I haven't really talked about yet, but I do hold close to my heart and close to what I believe in. You know, everyone always talks about like testing, especially in schools for younger kids. And why is it that art and music and a lot of those artistic style programs are the first to go? Because they're not testable. However, you've got things like art and music that actually physically affect our brains. They make the little divots and wrinkles in our brains to help us on the cognition level, right? So was it cognitive psychology? Did you take that class with me?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were talking about that, and I remember they were talking about how when they finally dissected Einstein's brain, they found a particular U shape on the left frontal lobe that he had, which they hadn't seen before in many people. And it wasn't until later that they realized that that only came from learning to play the violin. String instruments creates a U shape right here in the frontal lobe, which is where your analytics are, right? How you can analyze certain things and control certain feelings, right? Your frontal lobe, right there. All from playing a string instrument. Okay? There's another one we talked about too, where playing the piano actually creates 4 little divots on the right side of the brain, right? So, these things are not testable. You cannot test for those certain things unless you're actually dissecting someone's brain to see if they did. Okay? That being said, that sort of cognitive psychology is not testable in all the standardized tests that they want to shove down all our kids' throats. And then they cut films like art. They cut films. They cut programs like art. They cut programs like music. And that really irritates me so much, because I'm a huge advocate for the arts and for music, because they do help build on the back end. Think of it like programming. If you go through programming a website, you have the back end programming to make sure it goes down. If you're not a programmer, there's all this sort of programming language that you have to type in very specifically. So then when it shows up on your graphical user interface on here with pictures and how you see it, that's the front end. You don't see the back end unless you're into that stuff. All right? Same thing happens with art and music. Okay? All those extra activities that we take out, you know, that builds the back end of our learning processes. You want kids to learn better? Put them in art and music. Okay? Get them into those things, because those help build cognitive processes to help them think and absorb more information better. Sorry, rant. I'm good. I'm cool. All right. Let's move on, because I think we're still a ways to go. All right. When we presented the restoration of La Dolce Vita a decade ago in Rome, Bertolucci made a special point of attending. It was difficult for him to get around at that point, because he was in a wheelchair and in constant pain. But he said he had to be there. And after the film, he confessed to me that La Dolce Vita was the reason he turned toward the cinema in the first place. I was genuinely surprised, because I'd never heard him discuss it. But in the end, it wasn't surprising. It wasn't so surprising. The picture was a galvanizing experience, like a shockwave that passed through the whole culture. Oof. Impact, man. Oh, that's La Strada, yeah.
Yep.
The 2 Fellini pictures that affected me the most, the ones that really marked me, were I, Vitelloni, and 8.5. I, Vitelloni, or is it E, Vitelloni?
Or that's that numeral.
It's E, Vitelloni, because it captured something so real and so precious that related directly to my own experience, and 8.5 because it redefined my idea of what cinema was, what it could do, and where it could take you. I now want to just say E Vitelloni. But I don't know if it's E or I. Sorry, I do not speak Italian. Released in Italy in 1953 and 3 years later in the United States, was Fellini's third film and his first truly great one. It was also one of his most personal. The story is a series of scenes from the lives of 5 friends in their 20s in Rimini, where Fellini grew up. Alberto, played by the great Alberto Sordi. Leopoldo, played by Leopoldo Triste. Moraldo, Fellini's alter ego, played by Franco Interlagni. Riccardo, played by Fellini's own brother. And Fausto, played by Franco Fabrizi. They spend their days shooting pool, chasing girls, and walking around making fun of people. They have grand dreams and schemes. They behave like children, and their parents treat them accordingly. And life goes on. So art imitates life. Mm-hmm. Right? I felt like I knew these guys from my own life, my own neighborhood. I even recognized some of the same body language, the same sense of humor. In fact, at a certain point in my life, I was one of these guys. I understood what Moraldo was experiencing, his desperation to get out. Fellini captured it all so well. Immaturity, vanity, boredom, sadness. The search for the next distraction, the next surge of euphoria. He gives us the warmth and the camaraderie and the jokes and the sadness and the desperation within all at once. I Vitelloni is a painfully lyrical, bittersweet film. Sorry, and it was a pivotal inspiration for Mean Streets. It's a great movie about a hometown, anybody's hometown. As for 8.5, everyone I knew back in those days who was trying to make movies had a turning point, a personal touchstone. Mine was and still is 8.5. Whew. So, I'm telling you, Fellini was one of the most influential filmmakers out there, not just for Scorsese, but for many, many other filmmakers out there as well. So it's really great to hear him recount how he knows for a fact. As for me, I can't really tell. I've always kind of loved movies. I grew up on them. Movies, TV. That was just my generation. That's all we did. We were the original couch potatoes. Why? Because my parents could afford something. They wanted to give us a life that they didn't have. I always hear stories about my mom growing up and in the house that she had, and it was just so torn apart. It's like the water, when you turn on the water, all the water pressure we have now, it's like, nope, it just trickled out. So whenever they had to take showers or baths, or ever had to cook anything, that's what they had to live with on the daily. And then so many other experiences as well. So when they make this life for us, it's like, oh, we've got all these comforts, and I can't admit, I did grow up very comfortable, and I was a couch potato for a very long time, but I've always been attracted to filmmaking and storytelling and all those things, so that's why I got into it. But I can't really tell because it's always been part of me. I guess which ones really drove me to become a filmmaker. So my experiences was a little bit different just because it was always there, right? I don't know. What about you? Do you know when you decided to become a filmmaker?
Well, I think I knew because as much as I loved drawing before, but I loved storytelling, I just couldn't bring myself to do animation.
Oh, animation's tough.
To be in front of the computer for that long.
Yeah.
So that's when I kind of turned to film.
Okay.
Because it was that I get a little bit of both sometimes, being creative and then also being away from the computer and being more analytical, Mm-hmm. I felt like I didn't get that as much doing more animation when I was younger.
Yeah.
As when I started doing film, I felt like I got the best of both worlds.
That's cool.
So.
All right, favorite movie? Any genre? Put you on the spot. What is it? Tell me.
Silver Bullet.
Okay. Yeah, I should have known. Yes.
Well, because it was a story before, and it was a comic. It was Stephen King's comic, and I never knew he did a comic until then. And then, I really enjoyed the movie too.
Is that the one with the bat?
Yeah.
Yes. It was like...
We realized he doesn't use it just once. He uses it a couple times, and I'm like,
it's fantastic.
What? Werewolf. That's amazing.
Yes. Great movie, Silver Bullet. Yeah. It's fantastic. Okay. And so, one of my favorite movies, I have movies in all genres that I love. But one that stands out probably the longest is The Princess Bride because it's a multi-genre. You know, it was an action adventure comedy. It's a satire to me. It's like and it, for the most part, a family movie too. So it had elements of everything.
I don't know. I haven't heard you say "as you wish" to me.
Wow. Okay.
There's some things that your producer needs.
All right. As you wish.
You can't use that now.
Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that later. But delivered. All right. Okay. So moving on with this article. All right. What do you do after you've made a picture like La Dolce Vita that has taken the world by storm? Everybody's hanging on your every word, waiting to see what you're going to do next. That's what happened with Dylan in the mid-'60s after Blonde on Blonde. For Fellini and for Dylan, the situation was the same. They had touched legions of people. Everyone felt like they knew them, like they understood them, and often like they owned them. So pressure from the public, from the fans, from critics and enemies. And the fans and the enemies often feel like they're one and the same. Right? That's that whole celebrity lifestyle, right? How it changes people, or how much that gets put onto that. I think we just watched that thing for, what was it, Framing Britney? That thing was rough.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that thing was rough to watch. Pressure to produce more. Pressure to go further. Pressure from yourself on yourself. Yep, I get that. Someone was telling, I think it might have been my wife. They were like, you're just going to be your own worst critic. You know, you keep saying this stuff. And you've told me this too recently. Like, you're just going to be your own worst critic. Everyone's telling me the same thing. But yeah, it's absolutely true. But that pressure, you know, especially for me, that keeps me moving. I'm always moving. You know, like I said, this past week I kind of took some time off, some personal things going on, but you know, everybody needs that time. But I am always moving. You know. All right. For Dylan and Fellini, the answer was to venture inward. Dylan sought simplicity in the spiritual sense, meant by Thomas Merton, and he found it after his motorcycle accident in Woodstock, where he recorded the basement tapes and wrote the songs for John Wesley Harding. Fellini started with his own situation in the early 60s and made a film about his artistic breakdown. In so doing, he undertook a risky expedition into uncharted territory, his interior world. His alter ego, Guido, is a famous director suffering from the cinematic equivalent of writer's block, and he is looking for a refuge, for peace and for guidance, as an artist and as a human being. He goes for a cure at a luxurious spa, where his mistress, his wife, his anxious producer, his prospective actors, his crew, and a motley procession of fans and hangers-on and fellow spa-goers quickly descend upon him. Among them is a critic who proclaims that his new script lacks a central conflict or philosophical premise, and amounts to a series of gratuitous episodes. The pressure intensifies. His childhood memories and longings and fantasies arrive unexpectedly through his days and his nights, and he waits for his muse, who comes and goes fleetingly in the form of Claudia Cardinal, to create order. 8.5 is a tapestry woven from Fellini's dreams. As in a dream, everything seems solid and well-defined on the one hand, and floating and ephemeral, on the other. The tone keeps shifting, sometimes violently. He actually created a visual stream of consciousness that keeps the viewer in a state of surprise and alertness, and a form that constantly redefines itself as it goes along. You're basically watching Fellini make the film before your eyes, because the creative process is the structure. Many filmmakers have tried to do something along these lines, which they have, but I don't think anyone else has ever achieved what Fellini did here. He had the audacity and the confidence to play with every creative tool, to stretch the plastic quality at the image to a point where everything seems to exist on some subconscious level. Even the most seemingly neutral frames, when you take a really close look, when you take a really close look, have some element in the lighting or the composition that throws you off. That is somehow infused with Guido's consciousness. After a while, you stop trying to figure out where you are, whether you're in a dream or a flashback or just plain reality. You want to stay lost and wander with Fellini, surrendering to the authority of his style. That's really cool reflection on that. I really like how he's going off on that. You know, just becoming immersed in the art. You know, film is one of those mediums where you can, you know, a lot of people go to art museums, and I've heard David Mamet talk about like, yeah, you know, it's like what was he talking about? Fine art. Was it fine art? Mm-hmm. Something on the lines of art house films, right? And of course, this was in, I believe, in his master class. Was it his master class, or it might have been his book? Something on the lines of like, you know, you can go and appreciate an art house film, all right, because it has taste. There's a certain taste to it, you know, and you might only find certain types of people. Some may be pretentious, some maybe not, you know, but you can appreciate it, but you can't really love it. You know, he was talking about something on the lines of you can't really love an art house film because it's meant to break a lot of tropes. It's meant to break a lot of that style, and that's why they are not as popular. It's like going into an art museum. How many times do you go to an art museum? Or maybe if you do work in an art museum, you know, that doesn't count. But how many times does the general public go? Usually go once in a while. It's not a daily thing. You go and absorb and you appreciate during that time. But it's not something that you actually love, that you keep coming back to. Which makes film such a huge, you know, something that's like a huge type of medium. Right? Because you can go beyond that. You can take that beyond going to the theater. And then you could relive that. And people do relive those over and over and over again. Even art house films, especially nowadays with the streaming platforms and whatnot. Even though he's talking about it in a relatively negative sort of concept. I know he's going through a lot of the history, but to me it's all relevant. You know, and studying history, film history, you know, and talking about film history with you and stuff like that, like how we've done this a lot, you know, beforehand. You know, all that builds towards this, and why, you know, more people need to have this conversation about where stream is taking us and quality and content versus, you know, like I said, we talked about it, how Netflix was buying up as many, you know, pictures as they can once Disney announced that they were making Disney Plus and have their own streaming platform. And I think what's the biggest library? Was it Sony?
Yeah.
I think Sony has the biggest catalog of films, but Disney was a close second, I believe. And then Netflix, of course, losing a lot of those. They wanted to do it. And now you got the Stream Wars. That's kind of the start of the Stream Wars, how a lot of that started. Or how a lot of that coincided with all this. So, anyways, anything else to add? Because I know I'm going off on many tangents. No? Good. Alright, the picture reaches a peak in a scene where Guido meets the Cardinal at the baths. A journey to the underworld in search of an oracle, and a return to the clay from which we all originate. As it is throughout the picture, the camera is in motion, restless, hypnotic, floating, always bearing towards something inevitable, something revelatory. As Guido makes his way down, we see from his point of view a succession of people approaching him, some advising him on how to ingratiate himself with the cardinal and some pleading for favors. He enters an anteroom filled with steam, filled with steam, and makes his way to the cardinal, whose attendants hold a muslin shroud in front of him as he disrobes. We see him only as a shadow. Guido tells the cardinal that he's unhappy, and the cardinal responds simply, unforgettably, "Why should you be happy? That is not your task. Who told you that we come into the world in order to be happy?" Every shot in this scene, every piece of staging and choreography between camera and actors is extraordinarily complex. I cannot imagine how difficult it all was to execute. On screen, it unfolds so gracefully that it looks like the easiest thing in the world. For me, the audience with the Cardinal embodies a remarkable truth about 8.5. Fellini made a film about that film. That could only exist as a film and nothing else. Not a piece of music, not a novel, not a poem, not a dance, only as a work of cinema. Ha! When 8.5 was released, people argued over it endlessly. The effect was that dramatic. We had our own interpretation, and we would sit up till all hours talking about the film, every scene, every second. Of course, we never settled on a definite interpretation. The only way to explain a dream is with the logic of a dream. The film doesn't have a resolution, which bothered many people. Gore Vidal once told me that he said to Fellini, "Fred, less dreams next time. You must tell a story." But in 8.5, the lack of resolution is only right, because the artistic process doesn't have a resolution either. You have to just keep going. When you're done, you're compelled to do it again, just like Sisyphus. And as Sisyphus discovered, pushing the boulder up the hill again and again becomes the purpose of your life.
So the film itch?
Yeah. Trying to continue to make films over and over again. You're never as good as your next film. Or you're only as good as your next film, excuse me. Right? But yes, the film itch. Definitely the film itch. Trying to continue on. Becomes a purpose. This is why we tell a lot of people too, like, we're not hobbyists. We don't do films as purely for a hobby. It's something that's kind of ingrained into us to do. Which is why it's like, this is why we keep doing what we do. This is why we keep training other filmmakers around here to build a community out here. We like to say we're a true grassroots indie company because we want to build here. In our area, and we've trained countless people. We've done talks at schools. Used to teach. I used to teach video production to high schoolers. I mean, there's a lot that we've done. Geez, only in the past few years.
A lot of groups.
Yeah, a lot of groups that we've helped out and spread it. And not just around here, too. We've talked to a lot of people online as well. And it's been great. It's been fantastic. And somewhere along the line, we kind of forgot to do our own films, our own features. Because we want to move into features. But I know that we also find the value in working and building teams on the short films, too.
Helping others.
Yeah. Absolutely. So helping other people with that, it's vastly important to build that community. And there's countless, artists out here, that are extremely talented, and a lot of them that are really yearning to learn. They got that hunger to want to learn, which is fantastic, which is why we, enjoy this area, not only because it's our home, but just because of that. It's not Hollywood, and I love it. It's not Hollywood. Where? Ooh, excuse me. The movie had an enormous effect on filmmakers. It inspired Paul Mazursky's Alex in Wonderland, in which Fellini appears as himself, Woody Allen's Stardust Memories, and Fosse's All That Jazz. Not to mention the Broadway musical 9. As I said, I can't count the number of times I've seen 8.5, and I can't even begin to talk about the many ways that it's affected me. Fellini showed all of us what it was to be an artist. The overpowering need to create art. 8.5 is the purest expression of love for the cinema that I know of. So yes, 8.5 and La Dolce Vita. I believe La Dolce Vita is what he got the Palme d'Or for, from Cannes, and then I forget how many Academy Awards he won from that. Falling Up. Oh, what's up?
Has anybody rebooted it?
What, La Dolce Vita?
Yeah.
Or
8.5.
You mean done like a reboot?
Mm-hmm.
I hope not, but I know there's been a lot of people that have tried to imitate it. In certain films like that, like, honestly, we're not that much into reboots. Like, we enjoy watching them, and there have been some fantastic reboots, that have happened. We've even talked about Scarface. Scarface is a reboot.
I could see a reboot for these. They're a lot older, right?
Yeah.
But seeing reboots after, 10 years, less than 10 years, 20 years, I'm just like, okay, we just saw that.
Yeah, and I think that, I think it's harder, though, trying to reboot those. Like, we're trying to reboot classics like this. Mm. I mean, you can definitely take thematic material. I mean, that's what Tarantino does. He takes from a lot of Japanese films, and he just repurposes them for his own films, which is why a lot of times it's like, what was the saying I said? I never learned to lie, cheat, or steal until I got into film. You know, they steal from each other. They steal a shot. They steal a setup. They steal all the time. because it's just the artistic medium. It's like repurposing. I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt has forget what that site is called, but he does have something on the lines of it where people add in art, repurpose it. Man, I had the app before. I don't have it anymore. And then they repurpose it and repurpose it and repurpose it over and over again, and I have no idea what it's called. That really stinks because I was on there for a minute. Dang, that's already been a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally forget what the name of that thing is. I'm sorry, guys. But it's pretty easy to find. Just shows you how long I've been out of it for that. Anyway, but yeah, like his whole program is about reappropriating other people's art on there, and you know that going into it, and it's kind of like how film has been, without just straight. Jeez, I can't think of the word. When you take somebody's work.
Plagiarism?
Plagiarizing somebody. Your interpretation of art or a premise. Like you can't really copyright a premise. Which is a what if this happens, right? You can copyright a script. You can copyright a treatment, but you cannot copyright a premise or an idea. So this whole idea where young filmmakers think that they don't want to share ideas or their own ideas or their own interpretation of ideas because they're afraid someone's going to steal it. No one can steal your vision of it unless they're straight plagiarizing your work, your script, your treatment, all that. So that's why it's like this really strange gray area that a lot of people don't really talk about, or they sort of do, or again they just kind of shy away from it and they don't want to talk about it. And I get that, and that's fine. But yeah, when you're talking about like rebooting it, like I don't know how you would want to reboot some of the classics like that.
Hard to.
Yeah, I mean that's like trying to reboot. And they've done some period pieces where they have, or have done like biopics of certain people, like Chaplin. Mm-hmm. They try to recreate certain films that he did with that in there. What was the latest one from Bohemian Rhapsody? Just kind of recreating some of their performances.
Yeah.
Things like that. So there are ways to kind of recreate those, but I kind of want to be like, well, have your own interpretation of it. Like we just talked about like Roma, and how Roma's kind of takes the same sort of idea. It's like a semi-autobiographical, picturesque of the director's life, growing up. So it's kind of similar to Fellini's Roma, even around the same times, the 1970s. So,
Well, it's like books, why everybody is like, oh, this isn't the same from the book. It's because it's somebody else's view on that story,
Yeah, not just books though, too, but it's when you're talking about films too, it's a completely different medium. Mm-hmm. Or you're just talking about in the aspect of just I see.
People are like, oh, it's not the same,
Yeah.
Because it's somebody else's interpretation of it. The same thing if you were to do a reboot, it's somebody else's interpretation of the story.
That's true. Yeah. What was when we just they just found Bram Stoker's
Dracula
version? Yeah, Dracula. I forget where. Not the Netherlands. It's like some very small country, and they found out like there was a Bram Stoker's version, but it was actually somebody kind of did their own version. They just took the beginning of Bram Stoker's and they sort of made like their own fanfic, but everyone ate it up as Bram Stoker's through the translation. That's kind of funny. I'll have to look that up. That was kind of funny though. All right, let's try to finish this article then. All right, following up La Dolce Vita, difficult. Following up 8.5, I can't imagine. With Toby Dammit, a medium-length picture inspired by an Edgar Allan Poe story. You're talking about interpretations. It's the last third of an omnibus film called Spirits of the Dead. Fellini took his hallucinatory imagery to a razor-sharp level. The film is a visceral descent into hell. A Fellini Satyricon. He created something unprecedented. A fresco of the ancient world that was science fiction in reverse, as he called it. Amarcord, his semi-autobiographical film set in Rimini during the fascist period, is now one of his most beloved pictures. Its favorite of Hao Xiaoxian, for example, though it's far less daring than the earlier films. Still, it's a work filled with extraordinary visions. I was fascinated by Italo Calvino's special admiration for the film as a portrait of life in Mussolini's Italy, something that didn't really occur to me. After Amarcord, every picture had shards of brilliance, especially Fellini's Casanova. It's an ice-cold film, colder than the deepest circle of hell in Dante. And it's a remarkable and daringly stylized but truly forbidding experience. It seemed like a turning point for Fellini. And in truth, the late 70s and early 80s seemed like a turning point for many filmmakers around the world, myself included. The sense of camaraderie that we all felt, whether real or imagined, seemed to break apart, and everyone seemed to become her or his own island, fighting to make the next picture. Oh, that's a cool picture.
Isn't that how it is now?
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to...
Yeah, so yes and no. So I believe there are a lot of people that are pushing forward with it. At the same time, there is just... I feel like they've moved away from the more... How to put this... How do I put it delicately, or not so delicately? Kind of like the higher function style films, whether they're...
Concept?
Yeah, higher, not just higher concepts, because there are still high concept films that just are basically not that good, or just don't have very good thematic material in it. It's more of like they've moved away from the spiritual, and it's more shock value. Again, more kind of like that theme park style filmmaking. There to entertain, but then they try to throw in issues that are zeitgeist, or like kind of like zeitgeist films, where they're trying to throw in modern problems or modern reflections forcefully, as opposed to actually do it. This is why I have a problem with I'm just so drawing a blank right now. Didactic films. Didactic films are films that try to shove down lessons into the audience. You know, it's like going to church. People don't go to the theater to go to church. They go there to be entertained. That is your number one, purpose of that form of art, is to entertain people.
A lot of people tell me that. Like, I'm just tired of watching movies because of how didactic they get.
Yeah, trying to teach me a lesson. It's like, I don't want to be taught a lesson. I want to enjoy the lesson. The lesson isn't for you to learn, it's for the character to learn. And whether they can fill in for that, right? The audience fills in a lot of the blanks. This is another reason why I don't like on-the-nose dialogue. And again, we fall into that too as screenwriters. All the time. On-the-nose dialogue. It happens. But that's where subtext comes in. What is actually being said? Just because someone says something doesn't mean it must be true. And that's true for life anyway. Just because someone says something doesn't mean you actually that's what they actually mean, or that they're just not lying their ass off. I don't know why people think like everything has to be on the nose, to the point. That's what it is, done and done. And I know that's a stylization for some of the tropes for certain characters, but at some point, it can't be every character. It can't be every story. There has to be more to it, because believing that people and issues and spirituality and self and relationships and everything is only superficially, has value superficially, and that's it. You're missing such a huge part of life. And again, this is why it's like whenever we're talking about story and whatnot, we want to expand upon that. We don't want to be like doing the theme park type films. I love doing it because, again, popcorn flick. Be like, oh, that was funny. Oh, that was fun. Great. Fantastic. But we also want to do the art side of it too. So it's not every film that we do that, but yeah. Have fun with it. Loving the art of it. Living it. Wanting to do that. I mean, that's all important. How did I get on this topic? It's just, but it's just one of those things. Didactic films is what we're talking about. Yeah. So when people want to put in these things of just being overly social justice warrior style films, it's like, I don't want to go see it just based on all the bullshit you're trying to push. You know? Why is it that the politics in the film have to reflect out onto us? Right? The point of again, for that entertainment is for us as the audience to either connect personally to a character or reflect on how that as actually a reflection of life in our own self. That's what I was talking about. On the nose dialogue. When you give everything, if you say everything you mean, period, all the time, no subtext whatsoever, there's no question. That's like there's a movie. There's a great movie, Invention of Lying.
Yeah.
The Invention of Lying, where everyone just says everything out loud, and then Ricky Gervais is the main character protagonist in there, and then it was and this is still like within Act 1. I believe it's his mom that's dying, and he's so distraught, and she's so scared because everyone's like, oh, I'm just gonna die, I'm just gonna be nothing, and Ricky Gervais, out of his stress and sadness and everything, he made up this whole story of the afterlife just to give her comfort with it, and then it just gets blown all the way out of proportion because it was kind of like the invention of lying, you know. But people do have those complexities, and a lot of times we fill in those emotions as audience members. Like, it's great when actors do that, but really great writing and films don't tell you what to feel. You just feel that way. Which is why it's fine to have a variety of opinions about your film. Like, dislike, whatever. And I think, I forget who used to say that. It's like, if you watch any of our films, you don't feel anything, we failed. You hate it? Fantastic. You love it? Fantastic. We made you feel something. We made you connect with it somehow. That's the point. Alright? But if you ever walk out of film like, well, okay, whatever. That's a massive failure, especially a feature film. You had 2 hours, to get something. And if you don't, massive failure. Right?
Something for us to revise.
Yeah.
If our audience doesn't get it.
Yeah. And when you take people out of the film, when you're trying to do these didactic sort of films, and again, trying to force that onto you, it's like, hey, I'm no longer an audience member to reflect on it on my own. You want to shove it down my throat instead. It ruins that experience. It absolutely ruins that experience. So, just stuff to think about. This is a lot of stuff that we discuss all the time. We've discussed this with other filmmakers, and we've even had someone go like, whatever. Not you, sorry. That was not meant to you. That was just like, get out of here. We don't care. We're gonna keep doing it. And then they wonder why their films aren't doing that well. So, sorry for the semi-rant. I know.
Again.
Yeah, again. But got a lot to say. Alright, I knew Federico well enough to call him a friend. We met for the first time in 1970 when I went to Italy with a group of short films I'd selected for a presentation in a film festival. I contacted Fellini's office, and I was given about half an hour of his time. He was so warm, so cordial. I told him that on my first trip to Rome, I'd saved him and Sistine Chapel for the last day. He laughed. You see, Federico, his assistant said, you become a boring monument. When I talk about art, art museums. Yep. I assured him that boring was the one thing he'd never be. I remember that I also asked him where I could find good lasagna, and he recommended a wonderful restaurant. Fellini knew all the best restaurants everywhere. Oops. Several years later, I moved to Rome for a time, and I began to see Fellini fairly often. We would run into each other and get together for a meal. He was always a showman, and the show never stopped. Watching him direct a movie was a remarkable experience. It was as if he were conducting a dozen orchestras at once. I took my parents to the set of City of Women, and he was running all over the place, cajoling, pleading, acting out, sculpting, and adjusting every element of the picture down to the last detail. Realizing his vision in a swirl of non-stop motion, when we left, my father said, I thought we were going to have our picture taken with Fellini. I said, you did. Everything had happened so fast that they didn't even know it had happened.
I get that. Always getting distracted by something else, and you can do this, and you do that, and you do this. And then, being not necessarily a perfectionist, but being so passionate about your work that you want to make sure everything's really, perfect,
Yeah.
Really good.
It reminds me of when we filmed Making the Movie.
Oh yeah.
That was the okay. So that's typically how we run. We're just all over the place, and because it was like in a learning environment, and we were kind of instructed like, hey, let people do their jobs. You know, you don't need to be all into it. It was the first time I, as a director, was kind of like, I got nothing to do. Everybody's working so hard. I don't know what to do, and I'm like, what do I do?
Direct.
My hands. They were the actors were in wardrobe, so they were already getting changed over. Art department was already working on their stuff for the next scene. My AD already had it all handled. I was like, I'm just gonna sit around. It was the weirdest feeling in the world.
That's when you go get coffee.
I wasn't a big coffee drinker. I mean, like, but still, it's like, guys, what do I do? My crew's all working. I feel useless. I don't know what to do. But yeah, that was making the movie. Making the movie was it was kind of a spoof. It was written in like 15 minutes. It's like it, and we tried to do it like a trailer style thing, but it was for a class that we did, and we had fun. It was on a studio, you know, which was great, and we met a lot of great people. Worked with a lot of great people out on that one. Making the movie. It's like all right. Yeah, you ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. In the last years of his life, I tried to help him get his picture, The Voice of the Moon, distributed in the United States. Wait, what was...
Man in the Moon?
No. I'm trying to think of a title. I don't think that was mine. I was like, I know I didn't take that from him. There was a film that I had that was something of the moon. Oh, that's going to bug me. Sorry.
Tears of the Moon.
Tears of the Moon. That was mine. Yeah. Okay. The Voice of the Moon. Thank you. Distributed in the United States. He'd had a difficult time with his producers on that project. They wanted a grand Fellini extravaganza, and he gave them something much more meditative and somber. No distributor would touch it, and I was truly shocked that no one, including any of the key independent theaters in New York, even wanted to show it. The old films, yes, but not the new one, which turned out to be his last. A little later, I helped Fellini get some funding for a documentary project he had planned. A series of portraits of the people who made movies. The actor, the cinematographer, the producer, the location manager. I remember that in the outline for that episode, the narrator explained that the most important thing was to organize expeditions so that locations were near a great restaurant. Great. Sadly, he died before he could get started on the project. That sucks. I remember the last time I spoke to him on the phone. His voice sounded so faint, and I could tell that he was fading. It was sad to see that incredible life force ebb away. Ugh. That's gonna be rough.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. But I get that. And we've talked about that too, you know, like a lot of studios try to overcome or try to overwrite your art, you know, for the sake of distribution or broadcast, right? Your art gets manipulated to fit their machine in that sort of sense when you don't have it finished or when you try to go straight to them. So, or
they try to pull some BS for you to fall in line, you know?
Yep. Which is notorious for Hollywood. You hear about a lot of those stories.
Well, that like I always remember one that's like Robin Williams, you know, with the genie.
Oh, Aladdin.
He didn't want to be like advertised for that.
That was the beginning
for that movie, and they did it anyways.
Yep, that was the beginning of when they started using actors for advertising for animation. They're using their celebrity power. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that thing was huge, and he was just like, he was so against it, and they did it anyway. Disney said, screw them, they don't care.
Yep.
They didn't care. They did it anyway, and then just did it from then on out. Mm-hmm. That sucked so bad. And I think that was isn't that around the time where he also voice acted for Fern Gully? I think that was around the same time, because I'm trying to remember the stories, if that was the thing, because he was doing that, and then, yeah, I'm pretty sure he was doing it around the same time. I'm trying to remember that article, because it kind of delved into both, but that was a while ago that I read that one. But yeah, I mean, trying to do all those things, it's nuts, you know. And when you start working in the machine, that's why I keep saying, like, look, I understand going to Hollywood. I understand that it's got a lot of prestige. I understand that they've got a lot of the capital. They got a lot of the movie, you know, the power behind that. at the same time, if you're an artist and you want to make art, just go make art. Go make art, learn how to distribute it, right? So you can own your own art.
Or if you don't want to learn, then find somebody who does, and really do your research on who you're choosing to do that for you.
Absolutely.
Who's gonna partner with you to get you where you want to be?
Yeah.
And get them where they want to be. It's always a partnership.
Absolutely. To be honest, I know that a lot of this stuff that we're going over right now it's very anecdotal. It's very much his personal view and how he connected to Fellini. But to me, it's all relevant because again, there's so much available to us that it can be real easy to get lost in filmmaking and everything, And this is why a lot of people need to come together in communities to make films. Start learning to let go of ego, so it's not just some sort of ego thing. It's about, hey, what can we do together? How can we collaborate? Truly collaborate. I think we mentioned this before too in one of our groups. We're like, look, we don't mean to bulldoze. We just know when we have stories in certain genres that may be already available, and that's in no means a way to bulldoze our way in, because everything is manipulative. Everything is adaptable. We can change everything, every aspect of a film. Right? That was even a curse. A curse started out in a cabin in the woods, as a contemporary cabin in the woods, and now we changed it completely. Now it's got a 100-year history. In the very beginning, you can see you can branch off into that in prequels and spin-offs. There's 6 different families that are involved, into this one story, a contemporary story that you can branch off and make all these other stories for. That came from my very first script of writing, just cabin in the woods, haunted mask. That was it. I think we even thought about, remember we were talking about doing an anthology of mask stories?
Yeah, I remember that.
And throwing that on it. That was one of them. Just throw it, keep it as the original short, do an anthology, and then have an overarching story of how they all kind of tie together, and doing that. So everything is adaptable.
Everything has changed.
Everything has changed. Is that what that's...
Yeah.
Is that... Oh, but that's... Okay, next section. Great segue right into...
I thought that was funny. I was like, he keeps saying this word, and I was like, I wonder if he knows it's right there.
No, I didn't. It might probably subconsciously because I scrolled, but yeah. But anyways, but that's kind of the point is, everything's adaptable, and when people start throwing around their egos, again, if you find those people that feel like they know it all, they're wrong. If they're just trying to do that trying to prove a point, that's... Because again, I hold that kind of all along the lines of didactic films, and again, that's when you're talking about before, just to clarify with the social justice issues and stuff like that, it's not to say that those are not important. Okay, those are not important issues. I'm not saying that. Okay, what I am saying is when you're using that in a form of entertainment, right, as a movie. Look, you want to make a documentary about it, you want to do something that's influential to get information out, fantastic. But if you're trying to force that in there, it pulls away from the art. That's the point. Okay? So I just wanted to clarify on that because I know a lot of people take that like, well, it's real. It's something that's important to me. Fantastic. But you got to keep the politics according to the characters, not to the audience. Right? That's for them to react, not for your audience, for you to inflict onto the audience. Right? So, anyways, but then again, and that's just my opinion. Opinions are going to be an opinion. You take it or leave it. It's the same thing with collaborating. Real, true collaborating requires some sort of sacrifice from all parties. Okay? So whenever we do collaborations, like, hey,
it's also
consensus.
Open mind.
Yeah, open mind. Absolutely. But we always do it by consensus basis. Hey, majority said it. If it happened to be my idea, if it happened to be your idea, it happened to be their idea, whoever's idea was, fantastic. Majority likes it. Let's move forward with it. Because we can tell a better story than I can. Done and done. Period. Everything has changed. Alright. Hopefully, if that's it, then I feel like he's bringing it back to center. Hopefully. I don't know. Alright, let's move on. Unless you got something else to add.
Nope.
Okay. Everything has changed, the cinema, and the importance it holds in our culture. Of course, it's hardly surprising that artists such as Godard, Bergman, Kubrick, and Fellini who once reigned over our great art form like gods, would eventually recede into the shadows with the passing of time. But at this point, we can't take anything for granted. We can't depend on the movie business, such as it is, to take care of cinema. In the movie business, which is now the mass visual entertainment business, the emphasis is always on the word business, and value is always determined by the amount of money to be made from any given property. In that sense, everything from Sunrise to La Strada to 2001 is now pretty much wrung dry and ready for the art film swim lane on a streaming platform. Woo!
Wow.
Yes, thank you, Scorsese. Those of us who know the cinema and its history have to share our love and our knowledge with as many people as possible, which is why we're doing this sort of video.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we have to make it crystal clear to the current legal owners of these films that they amount to much, much more than mere property to be exploited and then locked away. They are among the greatest treasures of our culture, and they must be treated accordingly. Whew. It's like, Scorsese, my man. But yes, and I've mentioned this too. Oh, last paragraph.
Finish it out.
I suppose we also have to refine our notions of what cinema is and what it isn't. Federico Fellini is a good place to start. You can say a lot of things about Fellini's movies, but here's one thing that is incontestable. They are cinema. Fellini's work goes a long way toward defining the art form. It's by Martin Scorsese. Ooh. That right there. Oh, man.
Goes back to finding the balance between art and business, you know? But, like I said, like I mentioned before, it's like I've had a lot of people have been telling me they're like, a lot of movies nowadays they're not as entertaining as they used to be, you know?
And I get that, you know. But is that, and it's also a question, is that more like they're desensitized to the type of material? Think of it this way. When The Exorcist came out, how did people react versus how people would watch horror movies now? It's massively different. Like, Exorcist changed horror, most definitely. It was like people were fainting. They were literally fainting. They were going outside and puking, you know, because it was something that they'd never seen, you know. But now it's like, oh, horror film. We just watched the new Mortal Kombat trailer, and it's just like blood, guts, gore. Like, yes, desensitized. It doesn't faze us, but that's just kind of the point of it. All right. So was it that they were desensitized, or what? Is it true that there's not any, you know?
Well, not as many. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, but that's a question. But this is why we talk about it. This is why, like, more film communities need to be made. Why, you know, going and actually analyzing films, you know, becomes such a great practice. You know, going out and seeing many films. Like, I used to do that with music all the time. Back when they had Media Play and Sam Goody and then the mall, I used to go into the international section just to see what there were, something I've never seen before or listened to from music, something I hadn't heard it before. And I found a lot of crappy bands out there around the world, but at least I got to listen to them. And I wanted to hear if there was some sort of style that came out from there that I've never heard before. And I found some good ones too along the way. But the same thing goes for films, you know. And I think it's really interesting, especially with the neorealism and the history behind that in Italy, you know, versus say like how it's evolved over time. And like I think it's France. France actually has an independent film, like government branch of government, or not branch of government. It's like an organization in the government to help filmmakers.
Indie films.
To help indie films through theatrical release. And I'm like,
that's cool.
Get your A's in gear, America. I can make it happen. Why don't we have that here? We have smaller ones that kind of help out, but it's like they have to be themed. You know, it's like they don't look for, or maybe they do. I don't know. Like the programs we have here and the ones that we've seen all have to be like, well, if we're doing this because we're putting up the money, it has to be this theme. You have to do it this way.
It's more like they have control over what you're actually putting out in order for you to get, whatever you're looking for.
Yeah, the funding, the
whether
training.
it be funding or release, distribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, again, that's a little bit how it's different with, and I understand that's a different country and how they treat film and everything. And here, at least in other countries, especially in Europe, directors, a lot of times directors had that power. Here it's the producers. In the United States, it's the producers that have the power, right? So they say what goes or not. So whenever you're an indie, you make your film and then you sell it. If you're trying to get funding from a studio, that means they get to get involved in the creative process, your domain, right? So your work of art that Scorsese's talking about, like this, it needs to be touched upon in a way that it's like, well, you need to do your art, and until you've already sold a certain amount of tickets or whatnot, they won't treat you seriously to go, oh yeah, okay, now we'll let you go.
Like Scorsese and who else? Tarantino,
and a lot of other ones, even Michael Bay,
yeah.
all the big name directors out there, they get that. Because why? Because they know the machine, they've worked for the machine, and now they're moving on. And they can say, hey, well, I'm an auteur director, and if you want me to recreate something that is sellable or something, to get you on that business side, then you have to give me that creative control. And some directors do fight for that in their contracts, But, again, as an indie company, learning to do that on your own, finish your films first. Okay, take that lesson because we learned that from somebody else that was doing that.
Hold on. Finish your script first.
Script first. Do a vomit script, first draft, get it out, and then rewrite. Over and over again. And sometimes you have to do the page 1 rewrites. It just happens. Page 1 rewrite is everything gets scrapped. You start from page 1. Whether you have an outline or not, and you redo it. It happens. Alright? Then that shouldn't discourage you. Because if you really do have a story that you want to be out there. Like, we just went over some of our stories earlier tonight. I'm like, dude, what is that? Oh, that's not a movie we've, that's been made. But that's one that I've been wanting to see. Because why? That's our film. And it's not just because it's our film. It's because I want to see it made. I would love to go to the theater and go like, that. Oh, that's cool. Mm-hmm. So that's another reason why we do this.
Come on, guys, reap the benefit of theaters once they open up, especially as indies. Try to get your films in there while it's cheap.
Yeah, well, not just while it's cheap, too. But
well, because,
Yeah, I know.
There's something going on there with theaters.
I know there's a huge thing
and there might be something good for indies to try to get their foot in the door with theaters.
Yeah, and
especially smaller ones.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah,
but you're right, and this is something I've been saying for a while, and at least in our circles, where indie filmmakers are a vastly untapped source, and typically when they do, you got Hollywood and the Hollywood machine, which is the same across most all countries about that too, versus indies. Indies have always been like the original sort of ideas, right? And original stories that are being told. And a lot of times when you do those original stories and then Hollywood catches hold of it and then buys it out, they will wring that dry and then almost essentially make it a trope in itself. Make it cliche because they overuse it. Okay? So being an indie is a fantastic place to be for creativity, to make your art your own, to own your art. Finish your script, then finish your film. If you got to do what you can to get funding for it, do what you got to. Don't do anything illegal. Not advocating for that, but do what you got to do to raise the funds for your film to make it happen. Talk to people, send your query letters out, see who you can contact. Everyone knows and somebody else who may know somebody else that would want to know or want to do your film.
Build relationships.
Yes. This is like, yeah, we get what Scorsese's saying about the business side, and it is treated like a business, but there are a lot of indies that don't treat it like a business and then get lost in the fray because they're so focused on it. And again, like you said, balance between business and art. Know them both. Okay? Learn them both, so then you know when you're being taken advantage of. Versus, hey, you're going to do it our way. You know? You can have it that way. Or you can be like, hey, I own my art. I make my art. You know? It is mine. This is my story. This is how I'm making it. This is how I want it. This is how I'm doing it. And then make it. Make it happen. You know? And I think we've talked about that too recently, about like producers are those that, like, there's no defined trait or not trait, no defined definition of what a producer is, other than
that all the time.
Yeah, other than like what, they're the ones that
see the film through completion.
Through to completion, they put out fires. They see it through completion. That's why they get paid what they get paid. You know, versus like the month that a lot of crew or below the line get paid for a month, and they're like, why do we get paid so low? Why is that producer getting paid so much? Because they're seeing the project through all the way. That's like going, hey, you want to spend a year and a half developing, pre-producing, producing, post-producing, distributing, and doing all the business for that stuff.
And the majority of the time, you're not getting paid
for this amount of money. And then you get your below the line crew.
Film.
Yeah, unless you're doing studio film. And then you get all your crew complaining, like, when they find out, if they find out how much you're getting paid, like, oh, why is he getting paid so much? God, sitting in an office. No, it's so much more. You know, ego. Ego keeps getting in the way. Drop the ego. Let's get back to the art. Less ego, more art.
Check your ego at the door.
Even though it kind of be a reflection of it's like, yeah, check it. I caught that. I just caught that. Sorry, that was. When you got one of when you got one of the most egotistical fools telling you to check your ego at the door, that's kind of funny. Just the irony itself is okay. Well, all right. Show me how it's done.
Oh, master.
Yeah. Yes, that was funny. Some people know what we're talking about, but yeah.
It's another story.
That's a completely other story. Anyways, but that was I feel like that was a great article that Martin Scorsese wrote, and it does play like I'm seeing it a little bit more. Like, no, the first time he mentioned it with cinema versus theme park style films, I was like, I mean, I can kind of see it, but there are still cinematic aspects of it. But I get what he's talking about. This one more so, and not just because it aligns with some of the things that we've been talking about with stream and how they're trying to vertically integrate, how they're trying to block out theaters and just push them out so they can just vertically integrate. But this is actually more a part of the art form of film, and it is important to us because this is our medium, this is our industry. You know, we want to learn more about the business, we want to learn more about the art all the time. So keep pushing, guys. Keep pushing for building your own art. Master your art. Mastering your art means you probably won't ever master it, because there's so much to learn, there's so much to define, there's so much to refine, right, and just get better at. But you can't do that unless you're mindful about that and you know that that's the direction that you're going into, and know that you know nothing in the grand scheme of things. That's why you hire out and you find your groups.
Be Jon Snow.
Yeah.
No,
don't get stabbed.
Yeah.
Don't get stabbed or get into relationships with mothers of dragons. Well, hey, that's your thing. Okay, yeah, that's your thing. Yeah, I guess so. Anyways, but yeah, that's thanks for joining us for this. And we want to be putting out more content anyway, but we will be putting out more exclusive content, more behind the scenes stuff. If you guys want to learn more about the filmmaking process, we might be doing classes. I don't know yet, but that would be all in our exclusive content that we'll be releasing onto our Patreon, patreon.com/HideHooliganFilms. That's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be throwing, like I said, this week we're doing releasing some behind the scenes footage of some of the stunt stuff that we did for Fist of the Vagabond, which, that was, I think it's our first action film. Yeah, it's our first action film that we did, and we hooked up with a pretty cool team, the Urban Ninjas, out here in the Bay Area, and we had such a great time with it. So, if you want to see more of that type of material, We also have our RPG IRL shirts. We just had a sale on President's Day. That's at thewanderinggkiltsman.com/shop. We will be adding more designs, but check them out. They're some of my favorite shirts. I just got this one in. I'm so happy that it came in fairly quickly. I was surprised.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be like 5 to 10 days for delivery for the service, but I was like, oh, I got what?
Yeah.
Super happy about that. Redesigned store, that's released too. There's so much things that we do, like I said, outside of it. You want to get a more intimate look at all that, a deeper look and the inside of what it's actually like to run a business, run a film company, or just try to make films. Join us on that Patreon. Patreon.com/HideHooliganFilms. All right, we will see you guys next time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye.
Have a great one.